Good evening. I'm Dakota Carmichael. I'm the one behind Old History. Today's video is a little bit of a special one. It's going to be about a man by the name of Abraham Selover. Abraham is my great-grandfather who was born during the 1750s sometime. He lived in New River, Virginia. Now the video is going to revolve around his story, which is a first-hand account of a Native American raid that happened on an early American homestead. I do have to tell you, viewer discretion is advised. That story is a little graphic, but honestly it's a part of history, and I feel that it needs to be told. So this is his story. Good evening. Name's Abraham Selover. At least that's how we pronounced it. Today I'm going to be telling you a story from my youth. I think I can remember how old I was, but I think I was around about 5, maybe 6 years old. And now I'm an old man now, but I wrote everything down in a family Bible that I have. Keep in mind this thing is really old, but I hope you don't mind if I read you my story. Here we go. My father's residence was in New River, Virginia. It's where we lived. It's really close to the Potomac. We were outside doing chores. I can't remember exactly what we were doing, but helping around the house, stuff like that. When suddenly the savages, they came to our house. All the smaller children, my younger brothers and sisters, they all ran into the house. Myself, I turned my course and I ran through a meadow to a thick place of woods. When I came near the woods, I turned my eyes and saw 2 Indians pursuing me. Now, I escaped and I returned to the house. But when I got back, they captured us anyway. They took me, my mom, my brother, and my sisters. Then they plundered the house, and they took all that they could carry. Then immediately after, they took up the line of march. Now, it wasn't too long after that, well, I don't think we'd gotten too far, when my father came home. Now, whenever he got there, he seen the devastation. His house was destroyed, his family was gone, but he had known, he was well assured that it was the work of the savages. But it was all too much for human nature to bear. He let out a great yell, and we heard it plumb through the woods. Now the Indians, they heard that. Unfortunately, when they stopped in their line of march, and they sent 2 of their warriors back with their guns. And not too long after that, my mom and I, we heard the report of a gun. And then about a few minutes later, we seen the Indians return with his horse and his saddle. We were assured that it was my father. After that, it's a little vague, my memory's a little vague, but we took up the line of march again and we sailed out towards the Indian towns, I think over closer to Ohio and Kentucky. But during the journey, we had nothing to eat but wild meats. And under the stress of the journey and the fatigue, the 2 youngest children died, my 2 youngest siblings. Now, over the years, we eventually got out when I was about a teenager. We escaped. But my mom was exchanged and she was beaten pretty badly. But she lived with us near Red Banks, Kentucky in her final months before she died. John Slover, my brother, he died not too far from where I live in Red Banks. at a very advanced age, and he had about 7 kids. From a settler's point of view, this story is one of the many throughout early American history. There are stories such as the Fort Sabret massacre that happened over in West Virginia. It took place around the mid-1700s, close to the time that this event took place. In this story, almost every inhabitant of the fort, besides a select few that were taken prisoner, were massacred. They were scalped, and there's a very, very detailed account of this story. There's also the story of the Ingalls woman, and then we even have accounts from the diary of Jacob Kaufman, who owned the Kaufman House in the late 1700s here in Morristown. There are just many, many out there that exist. So the conflict between whites and Native Americans was as old as even the earliest settlements. But there were clear patterns of waxing and waning intensity. Homes such as the Amy home over in Watauga, or what is now Hawkins County, would be heavily fortified to defend against these raids that happen so periodically. But let's just back up. At this time, you have to take into account that the French and Indian War was still going on. And so it's possible that certain tribes seen the white settlers as a threat to the British or French governments. But how was this land acquired? So the simple answer is land grants. But the long answer is, in North Carolina, specifically, all of the occupied land in what is now Washington County was primarily confined to northeast Tennessee. For 40 shillings per 100 acres, each head of a family could buy 640 acres for himself and 100 acres for his wife and each child. Any amount of land above that costs £5 per 100 acres. But before the American Revolution, the person desiring the land paid the fees, obtained a warrant, and a grant from the governor's office. However, after the Revolutionary War, the federal government awarded bounty lands to citizens and soldiers for services rendered. In its simplest form, this involved the exchange of free land for military service. Land was most often given according to rank. However, some soldiers took advantage of pieces of land and sold it to passing by settlers. Other times, fees were paid to the entry taker's office. But again, we can't isolate this specific incident because we don't know what part of West Virginia this took place. We don't know what Mr. Slover may or may not have done to the tribe. There's too many factors to account for. But nonetheless, this is just one of the many things that happened on the frontier.
It's good to have an opportunity to discuss this diary entry story that you've heard. A lot of people have heard stories like that through history. And what we don't know is just as important as what we do know. In this particular story, we don't know what happened right before. We don't know what happened right after. We don't know what led up to this. We don't know if it was a personal story, personal as in a problem between the white man and the native people in the area, or if it was a part of a bigger picture. We just don't know. Don't know exactly when it took place, don't know exactly where it took place. All those are questions that really need to be answered before a really definitive perspective from a native view can come about. For example, we could say that in the 1750s, 1760 range, when we think this story took place, a lot of native people in this part of the country were allied with the British. And that was, of course, during what we now know of as the French and Indian War. It could be that this attack was paid for, instigated and paid for by the British. They were putting a fee on scalps, a bounty for as many Indian men's scalps as could be brought in. If they belonged to the other tribes that were fighting against the British. And the British would put a bounty on the scalps of white men who might be fighting for the French against the British during the French and Indian War, and do some of the same thing when it gets down to the American Revolution, paying the native people to take scalps of the enemy. So that could be a part of what's going on. Could be that there was an issue between this particular white fellow and those Indians, the specific ones who attacked him. Could be that, since we don't know what tribe it was, could be a cultural factor involved. For Cherokee, if your clan was attacked, someone in your clan killed, your clan was obligated to go and find that person, punish that person. But if that wasn't possible, if you could not get that criminal, you would take your revenge on someone in his clan. So it could be that this individual committed a crime against the Cherokee. Could be someone in his family did. And so the Cherokee would have considered that he was a part of that same clan, and he was the one to get punished, instead of the perpetrator who maybe couldn't be found. It's part of what's known as the blood law, or clan revenge, that was known at the time. Sometimes when clan revenge or blood law was put to work, put into effect, a person was captured to replace someone who had been captured in the clan. So there's any number of possibilities about the story, what could have brought it about, how it could have happened. We just don't know. And so we can't really speculate on the actuality of this story or any other without a lot of details. But those are some possibilities.